At 6, the Home Secretary announces an independent inquiry after the murder of Sarah Everard. Priti Patel says the inquiry will look into what she called the systematic failures which allowed Sarah's killer to be employed as a police officer.
It is abhorrent that a serving police officer was able to abuse his position of power, authority and trust to commit such a horrific crime.
Also on the programme tonight. As the army steps in to help with fuel deliveries, the Prime Minister insists there's no supply crisis and he's not worried.
What you can't do and must not do, Laura, is simply go back to the old, tired, failed model of the UK economy that has led to relative underproductivity by comparison with all our major competitors for decades and has held wages down.
A former Facebook employee turned whistleblower tells US lawmakers that the social media giant is harming children, stoking division and weakening democracy. More than 200,000 pupils were off school in England last week for COVID-related reasons. And close to a month's worth of rain causes flash flooding in parts of the UK. We'll have the latest on the downpours.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, can Arsenal, the only ever British winners of the Women's Champions League, produce a statement results as they kick off against the holders Barcelona tonight?
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Home Secretary has announced an independent inquiry into the systematic failures that allowed a serving police officer to kidnap, rape and murder Sarah Everard. In her speech to the Conservative Party conference, Priti Patel said the public needs answers to ensure something like this can never happen again. Last week, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to a whole life term in prison. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has this report.
So many questions after Sarah Everard's murder. How could Wayne Couzens be a police officer? Why wasn't he stopped earlier? Why are women still not safe? Nearly a week after we learnt the full distressing details of what a police officer did to Sarah Everard, there will now be a wide-ranging inquiry.
The public have a right to know what systematic failures enabled his continued employment as a police officer. We need answers as to why this was allowed to happen. I can confirm today that there will be an inquiry to give the independent oversight needed to ensure that something like this can never happen again.
The first part will look at Couzens, his previous behaviour and any opportunities missed to stop him. The second part will examine policing, looking at vetting how police investigate themselves and their behaviour. But the inquiry won't have the power to demand witnesses and evidence. But ministers promise that will change if needed.
It's not statutory, it's not judge-led, both of which we think it needs to be. And it can't just be about Wayne Couzens, it's got to be about the entire aspect of the case and also about women's treatment by the Met.
Brilliant, thank you. Hello, good morning.
Only yesterday, the Met Police Commissioner announced a review into her own force by an independent person working alongside her. There's also the police regulator investigation into whether the Met and Kent Police properly looked into 3 indecent exposure allegations against Couzens.
The Home Office can't say if any of the inquiry will be held in public, but the conclusions will be published. And just last month, the police inspectorate said there was an epidemic of violence against women and it needed to be treated as seriously as terrorism is. So it's not as if the government and the forces haven't been aware of many of these issues.
Sabina Nessa, one of more than 80 women killed by men since Sarah Everard. But this morning, the Prime Minister refused to back calls for misogyny to be classified as a hate crime because he believes current laws are sufficient. This new inquiry must not just highlight the problems, but make the changes so that all women can be safe. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Boris Johnson has said he's not worried about rising prices and the disruption to food and some fuel supplies, saying the country can't go back to what he called the failed model of the UK economy. The Prime Minister said the government can't magic up solutions and argued supply chains would sort themselves out. He was speaking to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Her report contains some flash photography.
This is fantastic.
He doesn't hide how much he's enjoying himself. Ahead in the polls, with the plump cushion of a huge majority back at Parliament. But carefree? The country is not, with rising prices, some empty shelves.
Prime Minister, why wasn't the government prepared for what you describe as very real stresses and strains on the country right now?
This is a function of a global recovery, and you're seeing stresses and strains caused by the world economy sucking in demand for everything from gas to HGV drivers across the planet. Rather than government stepping in to mend and patch and mend every bit of our supply chains, what you've got is, in this country, fantastic expertise, fantastic skill in logistics. You listen to some of the supermarkets, they will manage this.
But it's real-world problems that people are facing. You were warned back in April about the shortage of HGV drivers. You were warned about fuel costs back in July. There was a letter to you from the meat industry back in June. Isn't the point that you were warned about every single one of these issues, and you're basically still sitting saying, well, the government might be able to help around the edges, but basically business has got to sort it out?
Well, on all of those issues, and certainly there are issues in all of those sectors, but what you can't do and must not do, Laura, is simply go back to the old, tired, failed model of the UK economy that has led to relative underproductivity by comparison with all our major competitors for decades, and has held wages down. Government can't magic up changes to their systems overnight. British farmers.
Those farmers may have to cull healthy animals they can't process and sell. And drivers haven't been able to fill up at the pump. Yet the Prime Minister seems happy for the government to take a back seat.
People are experiencing real problems with all of these things, and it sounds like what you're basically saying is, it's not my problem.
In terms of the consumer, we're giving all the protections that we can. Some of the people who have been writing to me may be worried about this, but I'm not worried about this, because actually I think it will be good for their businesses to invest in people and to invest in capital.
So you're not worried about inflation?
I believe that supply will match demand, and that is what we want to encourage. What you've got to do as a government is look at the long term and look at how you can make the investments now that will bear down on costs. That's the way to deal with the cost of living, and fix this, and the supply chains will start to sort themselves out very, very rapidly.
For the Prime Minister, changing the economy is part of a deliberately different Tory look.
Afternoon, Carrie.
Hi.
You looking forward to conference?
Very much so, thank you.
Carrie Johnson striding in to take her own place on stage at an event supporting LGBT rights tonight.
Very much so, thank you.
But who's supporting her?
One last thing, there's a special guest coming to conference later. Are you looking forward to that?
I'm always looking forward to all guests coming to conference.
Well, your wife's coming to speak. Are you going to go and watch?
I'm sure it's going to be great.
Sorry.
This week's a show of confidence from Team Johnson, but that could tip into complacency. A risk some Tories fear the Prime Minister is too ready to take.
And of course, it is in Boris Johnson's political DNA that we've seen on display here this week to be upbeat, to be positive, to try to offer an optimistic outlook to the public. And of course, looking at where he is politically these days, it served him pretty well. But there's a real contrast here this week between that kind of tone and the conversations I've been having behind the scenes with ministers and MPs, and just how worried some of them are about how tough the next few months might be for members of the public. Boris Johnson obviously, overtly wants to show conviction and confidence, but there's a fine line between doing that and then ending up sounding like you don't understand people's concerns.
Laura Kuenssberg in Manchester, thank you. The inquests have opened into the deaths of 4 young gay men who were all murdered by the serial killer Stephen Port. The jury was told the inquests will focus on whether police missed opportunities to stop him sooner. The victims were all given fatal overdoses of the drug GHB by Port, who was jailed for life in 2016. The jury was told his trial had not answered the question of whether any of the deaths might have been prevented had the police investigated differently. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford.
4 young gay men, all found dead within 15 months of each other in the London suburb of Barking. 2 were found in this churchyard and 1 just outside it. All 4 were in their 20s and all were murdered with the date rape drug GHB. Their killer, Stephen Port, will die in prison as a result of his crimes. Today the men's families came to their inquests to make statements commemorating their relatives and to look for an answer to a key question. Could some of the deaths have been prevented? Anthony Walgate's mother, Sarah Sack, told the jury he'd moved from Hull to London to study fashion. She said they spoke several times a week until he was murdered. In her statement, Daniel Whitworth's grandmother, Barbara, said, "Daniel was my pride and joy. He had his whole life in front of him, and it seems so unfair that he was taken from us at such a young age." Gabriel Kovari was from Slovakia. His brother told the court he was a smart, talented, kind person who made the mistake of trusting people too much, and that cost him his life. Jack Taylor was a forklift driver who was hoping to become a police officer. His sister Jenny Taylor said, "Our whole world's been shattered into pieces. Our family has a big hole missing, and we're all so broken without him." The body of the first young man, Anthony Walgate, was found here outside Stephen Port's flat. It was Port who'd called the ambulance, and Port admitted lying to police about not knowing Anthony. But it wasn't until weeks after the 4th body was found that any of the deaths was considered as a possible murder. The coroner, Sarah Munro QC, told the jury, "We will have to consider, had the investigations into the earlier deaths been conducted differently, whether the lives of those who died later might have been saved." The jury heard about this fake suicide note that was actually written by the serial killer and were told they'd be looking at the competence and adequacy of the Metropolitan Police investigations. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Barking.
A former Facebook employee turned whistleblower has told a US Senate committee that she believes the company's products have harmed children, stoked division and weakened democracy. Frances Haugen told lawmakers the social media giant knew its apps were harming the mental health of some young users. Facebook said the company sees protecting its community as more important than maximising profits. Our correspondent James Clayton has this report.
Oh, it's raining.
Eleanor and Freya are both 14 and like many teenagers, they're both on Instagram.
As a teenager, you're looking at these people, like all these models and, influencers, they all are very skinny and they have like a perfect body. And when you're looking at that and then kind of comparing yourself to it, it's like I think it could be really damaging.
When you're like feeling at your worst and then you go on Instagram and you see things that are like targeted at you because you've looked at these kinds of things before, you see them like models, influencers, celebrities, things like that, and you're just like, oh, well, I'll never be like that.
Eleanor and Freya's concerns are in fact shared by one rather important company, Facebook, which owns Instagram. In fact, leaked internal research found that teens who struggle with mental health say that Instagram makes it worse. The woman who leaked that report is called Frances Haugen, and today she gave evidence in Washington.
The documents I have provided to Congress prove that Facebook has repeatedly misled the public about what its own research reveals about the safety of children.
She concluded with a devastating message that Facebook will continue to cause harm around the world.
My fear is that without action, divisive and extremist behaviors we see today are only the beginning. What we saw in Myanmar and are now seeing in Ethiopia are only the opening chapters of a story so terrifying, no one wants to read the end of it.
Here in Silicon Valley, Facebook has pushed back, saying that some of the research presented is misleading. And despite the fact that Instagram concluded that it could be damaging for children's mental health, it also says that it can have a positive impact. Both Eleanor and Freya say Instagram is fun, that's why they're on it, but it can cause anxiety too.
It's stressful because let's say you see someone post a photo and they're like with all your friends and you feel left out. But it's also fun to post a photo of you with your friends and you sometimes don't know someone's getting left out.
Facebook has said it's postponed a controversial project to create Instagram for kids. But we now know that people within the company and some very important politicians in Washington believe the company has put profit over the mental health of teenage girls. James Clayson, BBC News, San Francisco.
The time is 6:15, our top story this evening. The Home Secretary announces an independent inquiry after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer. And hope for thousands of people with sickle cell disease with the arrival of a life-changing new drug, the first in 20 years.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, as Tyson Fury prepares for the third fight of his trilogy with Deontay Wilder, the WBC champion tells the BBC, win or lose, he could walk away from the ring with nothing left to prove.
The number of pupils absent from state schools in England for COVID-related reasons rose by 2/3 at the end of last month. Latest figures from the Department for Education showed over 200,000 children were off school on the last day of September. But numbers are much lower than the end of last term, when bubble systems were still in place and more than 1 million children were absent. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley has been to a high school in West Yorkshire to see how they're coping with ongoing challenges posed by coronavirus.
Hi, it's Adele Webster, the Student Welfare Officer calling from Honley High School.
Another phone call to parents, another pupil with symptoms.
Complaint of headache and a cough, and it could possibly be COVID.
COVID is still causing disruption.
We need to just isolate from the other students, so if you just come up with me and we'll sit at the back of the hall, is that okay?
It's a busy week for Adele, the welfare officer.
If you can phone Dad for me.
Since the start of term, an increasing number of children are missing school.
Yesterday we sent 4 home. 2 of those have come back confirmed as positive. I'd say it's probably the busiest we've been in terms of cases in school.
We've spent a week at Honley High in West Yorkshire. Like other schools in England, restrictions have been lifted by the government.
It's been absolutely amazing to have what feels much more like a normal school again.
You all right, girls?
All of the children go into their lessons in their subject specialist teachers' rooms, science experiments happening, but at the same time, we're dealing with, unfortunately, a rise in the number of cases.
He's tested positive for COVID now, so he's not back.
As of today, we've hit 200 with students and staff, which I think that the highest number we had last year at any one time was 28 cases across the school.
Here, an old building makes ventilation an issue. A spike in cases means open evenings are now online. Assemblies are cancelled and the wearing of masks is being encouraged.
How have you been then?
I haven't felt as bad as I thought I would be.
For pupils in school and at home, these are difficult times.
I think the hardest thing is not seeing everyone. I've been away from my family.
So what are you doing then? Do you just like...
I've been doing Teams from home. The teachers, they usually put PowerPoints on for like what lessons we can do. So I've been just going through the PowerPoints by myself upstairs, and it's a bit lonely. Honestly, I'm so excited to come back.
Everyone's missing you a lot. Yeah, everyone's missing you.
Emily is in Year 11 and will be sitting her GCSE exams next summer.
It's a bit nerving for all the Year 11s, I think, because we've not only missed Year 10 of our learning of our GCSEs, we've also missed Year 9, which has been really disruptive.
Hiya, you're right. So just as we explained on the phone call...
Meanwhile, there's no let-up for the welfare officer.
Go and get him a PCR test.
This pupil is going home.
If they're negative, if he's feeling well, he can come back to school.
We have been doing the lateral flow tests and they've all come back negative, so... But in the meantime, I'm working from home, so it's all right for him to be at home with me.
Yeah, right, OK.
From tomorrow, the school is preparing to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds.
And it's very difficult to break that cycle.
The Department for Education says along with vaccinations, it's about managing the risks with ventilation and regular testing. But with just over 200,000 pupils absent in schools in England, COVID continues to keep children from the classroom. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at the UK's latest coronavirus figures, and the government data shows there were 33,869 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. So just over 34,000 new cases were reported on average per day in the last week. 6,747 people were in hospital with coronavirus across the UK yesterday. There were 166 deaths. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. And that means, on average, 111 deaths were announced every day in the past week. The latest figures on people who've been vaccinated have not yet been made available. Now, for much of the last century, thousands of unmarried mothers spent time in institutions in Northern Ireland. Many say they were detained against their will, used as unpaid labour, and forced to give their babies up for adoption. Now a panel of experts has recommended the establishment of a public inquiry to investigate what happened, as our Ireland correspondent Chris Page reports.
The secrets of these institutions are being shattered by the stories of those who were once shamed. More than 10,000 unmarried women were sent to mother and baby homes in Northern Ireland. They and their sons and daughters were the victims of a harsh morality.
My brother didn't have a voice at the time either, but I certainly will be his voice now.
Fionnuala was adopted from a home in Belfast. She discovered her brother had died as a baby and searched for his burial place.
I wouldn't call it a grave, it was more of a pit. There's over 30 babies in, the spot where he's buried. They were all just thrown in together like they didn't matter, in unconsecrated ground, in a bog, at the bottom of a cemetery.
She recently had a headstone put up to mark her sibling's 50th birthday.
Finally, he had his name emblazoned in marble. That's what he always should have had.
Ultimately, this inquiry has been brought about by the bravery of survivors who've spoken out to break the stigma. Now they want answers and accountability for what happened in these institutions and for the suffering of women and their children.
Develop a human rights framework.
The experts who've devised the investigation say it should fully uncover an appalling scandal.
We can't put back the clock on those who've suffered so much throughout all of this period. But one of the things we can do is to recognise their truth.
One of the many issues to be examined is the unpaid and exhausting labour in these institutions, Magdalen laundries. There were 4 in Northern Ireland. Over 3,000 women spent time in one. Caroline was sent to a laundry in Londonderry during her early teens.
It was very frightening. Very steamy, very warm. Constant machines, you could hear the machines always going. At a very young age, one of the women taught me how to use a back presser. And it was a presser as big as this table.
So there were many women in there who have been there for many years?
A long, long time. Some of them women were in from they were young girls and died in it.
There's a lasting legacy of trauma. Survivors hope the inquiry will expose wrongdoing and bring healing.
Women was ashamed. Shouldn't have been ashamed.
Caroline McGee ending that report from our Ireland correspondent Chris Page. An inquiry in France has found that more than 200,000 children, mostly boys, have been sexually abused by clergy in the French Catholic Church since 1950. The head of the inquiry said there were at least 3,200 abusers and accused the Church of showing a cruel indifference towards the victims. A Vatican statement said Pope Francis felt pain on hearing about the inquiry's finding. The Scottish Government has announced a £300 million package of investment in the NHS and social care ahead of a winter described as likely to be the most challenging ever faced. The plan includes the hiring of extra support workers, cash for care at home services and a pay rise for care staff. Opposition parties claim the plans were a sticking plaster for a health service facing crisis. Since the start of the pandemic, almost 6 million people on universal credit have had an extra £20 a week to help some of the poorest families in the UK. But it comes to an end tomorrow. The government says it was always a temporary measure, and the focus now should be on making sure work pays with higher wages rather than higher benefits. From Londonderry, our social affairs reporter Michael Buchanan has been speaking to some people affected by the change.
In one of the UK's most deprived areas, any job is a good job. Laura McShane works full-time as an admin assistant at an advice centre in Londonderry. Her husband also works full-time, but as both are on low wages, they started claiming universal credit at the start of the pandemic. As such, Laura didn't realise her benefit payment included the £20 a week uplift.
Our first payment, we got enough to help us pay at least half of our rent, and another half came out of our wages, but we thought that was fine, it was more than manageable. So we were counting on, this is what we get every single week. And then we got a message saying, we're taking this money off you as of this date, and we were just lost.
The UK government say the extra money was always meant to be temporary, and that with the economy reopening, there are jobs to be had, with vacancies plentiful.
You're going to the youth club at 2:30.
For Deirdre McCausland, childcare is a significant barrier to work, however. The former teacher, a single mother, can't find a job that works around her son's school hours.
I hate to say it, because I was one of the people in my local Asda when I was teaching in England, and there was a big crate, and you put it in, food bank crate, and I never knew where it went. I'm now one of the people who will be using food banks.
At the Women's Centre Derry, an experiment to show how much £20 can buy. They did an online shop and managed to buy all this: breakfast, lunch and dinner for a few days.
£20 means the difference between somebody eating and not eating. £20 meant the difference that a woman had the dignity of being able to feed her family and do it in a nutritional way and not feel less than. That's what that £20 means to me.
Maintaining the extra £20 a week would cost £6 billion, a figure ministers say is unsustainable. Instead, they've set aside £500 million to help the most vulnerable and want businesses to increase wages, as some already have. Other employers, however, can't afford pay rises, and if you love your job, choices are limited.
So what are your options then in terms of making up that shortfall?
Absolutely nothing. I'm already full-time at my job, my husband's already full-time at his job. There's nothing else we can do. We are just going without that money.
So what are you going to do?
Pray.
Laura McShane ending that report. Now, thousands of people in England who suffer from sickle cell disease will soon have access to a life-changing drug treatment, the first new therapy to treat the disease in 20 years. Sickle cell is a condition which reduces the amount of oxygen transported by red blood cells, causing severe pain and organ failure. Our Community Affairs correspondent Adina Campbell has this report.
Sickle cell disease dominates every aspect of Sarah Jane's life, from not being able to work, limits on who she dates, and long stints in hospital.
Just simple things I can't do sometimes, like washing myself or, brushing my teeth. I need help to do that. And I'm 27 years old, but sometimes I feel like I'm living in a 100-year-old body.
But she and thousands of other sickle cell patients could soon benefit from new treatments. A drug called crizanlizumab will now be available to hundreds of people on the NHS in England over the next 3 years. Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in London will be one of the first to offer it.
It is not the magic bullet because it's not curing the condition, but it's hopefully improving. It's going to reduce the number of pain episodes and hence improve a patient's experience and quality of life is what we hope.
The announcement of this new treatment could be life-changing, reducing the number of times a sickle cell patient needs to go to A&E by 40%. But this has taken far too long, according to senior health campaigners.
People have said to our staff, oh, this is a black person's disease, unlikely to affect me. But I think race has played a part in thinking, well, it's over there, it doesn't affect the majority population.
This is my box of meds.
Data from clinical trials will continue to be collected to find out more about the treatment's long-term benefits and if it's cost-effective to become routinely available. For those living with the disease, the future could be looking a lot brighter. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
There has been flash flooding in many parts of the UK after torrential rain overnight. In some places, it was up to a month's worth of rain, which fell in just hours. Well, in London's Knightsbridge, shops and offices were hit by a massive deluge. Many couldn't reach work, and motorists took risks navigating waterlogged roads. There was flash flooding in Pontypridd. The Fire and Rescue Service in South, Mid and West Wales said they've been inundated with calls for help. And this is the centre of Newcastle. Passengers were advised to delay travel after many services were suspended. Well, let's get the latest on the weather from Darren. And for many people, that heavy rain has continued through the day.
Yes, it has, but we're going to go from one extreme to another, Sophie. I'll use Newcastle as an example. Together with the rain that we've seen falling today, it was only 11 degrees for much of the day. Move things on, though, to Thursday and Friday. Not only is it dry, we've got temperatures reaching 20 degrees. But there's still rain at the moment, and over the past few hours it's been steady rain affecting eastern Scotland, a good part of northern England. There's more rain to come overnight. The rain does tend to ease away from eastern Scotland, move southwards across eastern England. The rain becoming lighter later, but it's going to be very windy down some of those North Sea coasts. Away from here, further west, the winds will become lighter, the showers will clear, skies will clear, and temperatures could fall away quite sharply across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A windy start, though, for eastern England tomorrow. The rain does move away, the winds will drop, and for many there'll be some sunshine for a while. But we've got the clouds streaming in across western areas, bringing some rain in the afternoon, mainly affecting Northern Ireland. Ahead of that, though, something a little bit warmer than today across parts of England and Wales. But it will get warmer after that. The winds coming all the way from the tropics, bringing the warmth and a lot of cloud, and on those weather fronts some rain. It could be quite wet across parts of Argyll and Highland on Thursday. Some rain threatening Northern Ireland. Looks mostly dry for England and Wales, quite cloudy. Further east it will be brighter, but even with the cloud, because the air's coming from a long way south, we've got temperatures of 19 in Belfast, 21 in Hull. And as we move into Friday, the winds are lighter for England and Wales, threatening some fog in the morning for the Midlands and the southeast of England. That'll lift, some sunshine coming through. The main rain band is towards the far northwest, so some sunshine for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and another very warm day for this time of the year. Sophie.
Darren, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.